you really have to figure out how to tell the most compelling story out of the footage that you got. Like not the footage you wish you had, or the story that, how do you tell the story that you or the director, if you're the editor, like set out to tell, but through the materials that are actually available.
What do you think was like the first time where you felt like, okay, I'm like, I've kind of broke through the initial, from like, I didn't really know what I was doing to like, okay, I know what I'm doing. I'm a professional.
Gosh, I feel like, there's like a few. I'm just trying to pick one. I guess maybe if I can talk about two, I'll just pick one editor one and then later like a director one, because I did start as an editor, and this was I went to NYU, and in my sophomore year I was fortunate enough to take a class by Sam Pollard, who is great editor, great director, just a documentary mogul, and that was the first time I realized, oh, because I was also on a student visa, I knew I had to like find a proper job after school. I was gonna have to leave the US, and how do I make it as a filmmaker? It's so vague. And Sam really, I think, not only taught me like the creativity of editing and what it can do for especially documentary, but this idea that like, oh, I should just like gain this skill, this like tangible skill that I could, be useful with initially out of school, and then also learn how to make films from other directors as their editor or as their editing team. And so that was like and then basically after school, that's what I did. I became Sam's assistant, and then kind of quite quickly was given chances to like edit, not just for Sam, but eventually for a guy called Mark Levin, who is like a verite king in my view. His projects filmed thousands of hours, and I got to join those projects. And I think, there was an HBO film I edited for Mark Levin called Class Divide that, looking back, is also about education and school, and again, like kind of those unfolding parts. It was also there was some interviews, but just like being the editor on that, like Mark giving me like, okay, you're editing it, and then really feeling like I was able to contribute. And I was still pretty young. I think I must have not been older than 25. That I think gave me the confidence, and just I was learning so much through just watching footage, and just not just the editing parts of it, but like through the footage, like imagining what it was like to direct. And I think that was about the time I realized like, this is great. Maybe I should, two paths, right? Like I could keep editing, and maybe I have whatever the background and the skill set and the insight to kind of become this kind of super special doc editor for this generation. That was like an attractive goal. But also, like I said earlier, I was like, but maybe I want to try to tell stories that really matters for me as a beginning, because as an editor, you don't get to usually pick the subject matter. So that was definitely, but I really gained confidence as a storyteller, I would say, first as editing, just those initial years when all I did was edit. Yeah.
I feel like, in looking back, I went to film school, and I remember my professor telling me, like, it was a rule that you had to direct and edit, your thesis. And she was like, Leah, you should really become an editor. Like, I think you have a knack for it. And I was just like, no, I don't want to edit. Like, I don't want to be behind a computer. Like, nah, like I'm good. And, that was like 6 years ago, and I still am not really, I mean, I can edit, but I really don't consider myself an editor. But I do think, to your point, starting out, if your long-term goal is to be a director, I think starting out as an editor is so smart, because I think there's a lot of directors out there that just start calling them a director in the beginning, and then they actually don't know how to direct the editor, properly. So can you talk about maybe some tips, again, like for emerging filmmakers that maybe have the dream of being the documentary director? What can they learn about directing through editing?
Yeah, I feel like a lot, I think maybe I'm sure like the doc DPs will say something similar going through shooting or other parts of, other roles too. But I think, you really have to figure out how to tell the most compelling story out of the footage that you got. Like not the footage you wish you had, or the story that, how do you tell the story that you or the director, if you're the editor, like set out to tell, but through the materials that are actually available. And also, sometimes, if we need additional things, I think, I started when I was editing, I started also getting like little like co-producer or producerial credits because you make suggestions and then it's like, oh, they go shoot that. And then it's more than editing, you actually influence the production. And I think that was like my way into like, oh, like the editor can also, it's not just stuck with the materials. If you're still shooting, you're like, oh, this would super be helpful for this, or like, but it's all in the world of the eventual film footage and imagining the audience, that what the audience needs almost, when I feel like the director should be and often is focused on what they want initially, which is how a project is born. But I think like having that perspective to think of like how it needs to be delivered or told becomes crucial, I think, in like that difference between like a good doc and a great doc, right? Like it's like if you can have great access, a great subject matter, interesting characters, but how the project is put together is so it can make that difference, And I think starting that way, and then for myself, kind of like gaining my own voice later, meaning like, oh, this is what I want as a director, but having that craft and that like toolbox, that creative toolbox to think outside of the box, or like knowing there's many ways to tell the same stories, and which is the best, like being trained in that, I think is super useful, and I think now as a director, I often don't know what I'm seeking now. I'm realizing is, again, like, and I edited, actually, I don't know if you knew this thing about Black Box Diaries, which was also nominated for an Oscar in the feature category, and I kind of went back for the first time in a while to edit for someone else through that project recently. And that's really fun because as a director, like you have, you're at the top in a way, and you stop kind of learning as well from others. You do learn from your crew, but like as an editor, I'm like kind of always kind of taking things from everybody else, and I did so much of that early on, and I'm realizing like I want to continue to also edit for others just so I can become a better director too. So that I think it's that crucial to whether it's editing or some other aspect of doc filmmaking, I think, to have, and it can't hurt, like it's being able to do and just find I can't shoot, I can't do other parts of doc making, so but I think even having one has really given me also like a kind of so far sustainable career, as well as contributing to my kind of self as a director.